The morning sun rose slowly over the small town of Windford, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It was a peaceful morning, like most mornings in this quiet corner of England. The streets were still empty, except for Mr. Patterson walking his old dog, and Mrs. Chen opening her bakery on Main Street. Lydia Brooks stood at her window, watching the town wake up. She held a cup of tea in her hands, feeling its warmth against her skin. She was 67 years old now, with silver gray hair that she kept short and practical. Her face showed the lines of someone who had lived a long life, but her green eyes were still sharp and clear. She had lived in Windford for 20 years. 20 long years of peace and quiet. 20 years of trying to forget. Lydia finished her tea and got ready for work. She put on her blue work clothes and heavy boots. She checked her tool belt, making sure everything was in place. Then she walked down the stairs of her small cottage and stepped out into the fresh morning air. The walk to Henderson's electrical shop took 15 minutes. Lydia knew every house, every tree, every corner of the route. She liked walking. It gave her time to think, or sometimes not to think at all. "Good morning, Lydia," called out Mrs. Morrison from her garden. She was an elderly woman with a kind face, always working with her flowers. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison," Lydia replied with a gentle smile. "Your roses are looking beautiful this year." "Thank you, dear. Oh, could you stop by later? My kitchen light has been flickering again." "Of course. I'll come by after work." This was Lydia's life now. Simple, helpful, quiet. Everyone in Windford knew her as the kind woman who worked at the electrical shop. The woman who would help anyone with their electrical problems, never asking for extra money, always patient and gentle. But nobody knew who she really was. Nobody knew what she had been before coming to Windford. Henderson's electrical shop was a small building on Market Street. It had been there for 40 years, run by Robert Henderson, a man in his 70s with a friendly face and hands that shook slightly these days. The shop sold electrical supplies, light bulbs, cables, and tools. But more importantly, it provided electrical repair services to the whole town. "Morning, Lydia," Mr. Henderson called out when she entered. He was sitting behind the counter, looking at some papers. "Good morning, Robert. How are you feeling today?" Mr. Henderson sighed. "Not too bad, not too bad. Though my back is giving me trouble again. Getting old isn't easy, Lydia." "No, it isn't," she agreed, though she never complained about her own age. "What do we have today?" Mrs. Patterson called. Her fuse box needs checking. And the school called. Something wrong with the lights in the gymnasium. Oh, and Tom Bradley needs help with his garage wiring. Lydia nodded, making mental notes. "I'll start with Mrs. Patterson, then go to the school." "You're a blessing, Lydia. I don't know what I'd do without you." Lydia just smiled. She picked up her toolbox and headed out. The day passed like most days. Lydia fixed Mrs. Patterson's fuse box, a simple problem with an old wire. At the school, she discovered that mice had chewed through some cables in the gymnasium. She replaced the damaged sections carefully, making sure everything was safe. The school principal, Mr. Davies, thanked her warmly. "You do such good work, Lydia. Always thorough, always careful. Where did you learn all this?" "Here and there," Lydia answered vaguely. "I've always been good with electrical things." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The truth was much more complicated. By late afternoon, Lydia had finished all her jobs. She stopped by Mrs. Morrison's house to fix the flickering light, just a loose connection, then walked home as the sun began to set. Her cottage was small but comfortable. It had one bedroom, a small kitchen, a living room with a fireplace, and a tiny garden in the back. Lydia had lived alone all these 20 years. She had no family in Windford, no close relatives anywhere. There had been someone once, long ago, but that was another part of her past she tried not to think about. She made herself a simple dinner, soup and bread, and sat by the window to eat. Outside, the sky was turning dark. The streetlights came on one by one, casting a warm glow over the quiet street. Lydia thought about her day. It had been a good day. Useful. She had helped people. That was what mattered now. But sometimes, in these quiet evening moments, memories came back. 20 years ago, Lydia Brooks had been a different person. She had been Squadron Leader Lydia Brooks, Chief Radar Operations Officer at RAF Benson, one of the most important air bases in the Royal Air Force. It had been an extraordinary career. Lydia had joined the RAF when she was young, in her early 20s. She had always been fascinated by technology, by how things worked. In those days, not many women went into technical roles in the military, but Lydia had been determined. She had started as a radar operator, learning the complex systems that tracked aircraft across British airspace. She had been brilliant at it. Her instructors had noticed immediately. She had an unusual ability to read radar screens, to understand the patterns, to predict what would happen next. Over the years, she had risen through the ranks. She became a specialist, then a senior operator, then a supervisor. By the time she was 45, she was the Chief Radar Operations Officer at one of the busiest air bases in the country. Her job was to manage a team of radar operators who monitored all air traffic in their sector. They tracked military aircraft, civilian planes, helicopters, everything that flew. It was a huge responsibility. Lives depended on their accuracy, their vigilance, their quick decisions. Lydia had been exceptional at her job. She had received commendations, awards, praise from superior officers. She had trained new operators, developed better procedures, improved the systems. She had been respected, admired, even feared a little by those who worked under her. She demanded perfection, because anything less could be dangerous. But Lydia had also been happy. She loved her work. She loved the challenge, the complexity, the importance of what she did. Every day she went to work knowing that she was helping keep people safe in the sky. She had friends at the base. She had a life outside work too. She went hiking on weekends. She read books. She had a small flat near Oxford that she loved. She had even been in a relationship with another officer, though it hadn't worked out in the end. They were both too focused on their careers. Life had been good. Life had been full of purpose and meaning. And then came that day. The day that changed everything. It was a normal Wednesday in March. Lydia had been on duty in the radar room, as she had been thousands of times before. The room was large and dimly lit, full of screens and equipment. Her team of 6 operators sat at their stations, watching their screens, communicating with aircraft, coordinating with other control centers. Lydia had been overseeing everything from her central position. She could see all the screens, all the data. She was like a conductor of an orchestra, making sure everyone played their part perfectly. The morning had been busy, but routine. Military training exercises were happening over the North Sea. Several commercial flights were passing through their sector. It was complex, but manageable. Exactly the kind of challenge Lydia was good at handling. Then, at 10:47 a.m., something happened. Later, the investigation would show that it had been a computer glitch, a rare software error in one of the radar systems. It had caused a delay in updating the positions of 2 aircraft, a military training jet and a civilian passenger plane. For 90 seconds, the system showed the planes further apart than they really were. 90 seconds doesn't sound like much. But at the speeds aircraft travel, 90 seconds can be the difference between safety and disaster. Lydia had been looking at a different screen when it happened, dealing with another situation. By the time she noticed the error, the 2 aircraft were much closer than they should have been. Too close. Her heart had frozen. Her mind had raced. She had seconds to act. She had grabbed the radio. Alpha Bravo 7, immediate turn left heading 270. Climb to flight level 180. Now. Her voice had been loud, commanding, urgent. The military pilot had responded instantly, trained to obey such commands without question. The passenger plane had been on a slightly different frequency, managed by civilian air traffic control. But Lydia had switched channels fast, her fingers flying over the controls. Speedbird 223, turn right immediately, heading 180, emergency turn. Both pilots had responded. Both aircraft had turned away from each other. The passenger plane's passengers probably hadn't even noticed anything wrong, just a slight change of direction, nothing alarming. But Lydia had watched on her screen as the two blips came within half a mile of each other. Half a mile. In aircraft terms, that was frighteningly close. Not a collision, but a near miss. Far too near. The room had been silent. Everyone had seen it. Everyone knew how close it had been. The planes had separated, climbing to different altitudes, moving away from each other. Crisis averted. But Lydia had stood there, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. She had caught the error. She had given the right commands. She had prevented what could have been a terrible accident. But she had almost missed it. Those 90 seconds when she hadn't been looking at that section of the screen. If they had been 120 seconds or 150, she might not have noticed in time. 183 people had been on that passenger plane. The investigation report had mentioned that number. 183 passengers and crew. All safe, all unaware of how close they had come to danger. But Lydia couldn't forget that number. 183 lives that she had almost failed to save. After that day, everything had changed for Lydia. The official investigation had been thorough. It had concluded that Lydia had acted correctly and professionally. The near miss had been caused by a system error, not human error. The equipment had failed, not the people. Lydia had actually been praised for her quick response and good judgment. The radar system had been updated. New safeguards had been put in place. Procedures had been reviewed. Everyone agreed that Lydia had done everything right. But Lydia couldn't accept that. She kept replaying that morning in her mind, over and over. What if she had been looking at that screen 30 seconds earlier? What if she had caught the error sooner? What if the pilots had been slower to respond? What if? She started having trouble sleeping. She would wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing, imagining what could have happened. She would see those two blips on the radar screen coming closer and closer in her dreams. During the day at work, she became obsessed with checking everything multiple times. She would watch the screen so intensely that her eyes hurt. She questioned every decision, every call she made. Her confidence was gone. Her colleagues noticed. "Lydia, you need to take some time off," her deputy had said. "You've been through a stressful situation. It's normal to feel shaken. But you're an excellent officer. Everyone makes mistakes. The system failed, not you." But Lydia didn't believe him. She knew something her colleagues didn't seem to understand. In her position, one moment of inattention could cost lives. And she had been inattentive. Just for 90 seconds, but it had been enough. Almost. She started seeing a military psychologist. The sessions were confidential and meant to help. The psychologist was a kind woman who had worked with many service members dealing with stress and trauma. "What you're experiencing is a normal response to a high-stress incident," the psychologist had explained. "You prevented an accident. You saved lives. But your mind is focused on what could have happened instead of what actually did happen. That's how trauma works." Lydia understood intellectually. But emotionally, she couldn't let go. Months passed. She continued working, but it wasn't the same. The joy was gone. The confidence was gone. Every shift in the radar room felt like walking on thin ice, waiting for it to crack. She made small mistakes, nothing serious, just tiny errors that had never happened before. Calling the wrong flight number, misreading an altitude, nothing that caused any problems, but they shook her even more. She was losing her edge. One evening, 6 months after the incident, Lydia had been walking home from work. It was autumn, and the leaves were falling from the trees. She stopped in a park and sat on a bench, watching people walk by. Normal people with normal lives. People who didn't spend their days responsible for hundreds of lives. And she realized she couldn't do this anymore. The thought came clearly, calmly. She couldn't go back to that radar room. She couldn't bear the weight of that responsibility anymore. She had given 23 years to the Royal Air Force. She had given everything she had. But now, something inside her was broken. The next week, she handed in her resignation. Her commanding officer had tried to convince her to stay. "You're one of our best, Lydia. Don't throw away your career because of one incident that wasn't even your fault. Take a longer break. Transfer to another position. Teach new recruits. You have so many options." But Lydia had made up her mind. She thanked him for his understanding and left. Her colleagues had been shocked. Some had tried to persuade her to reconsider. Others had been sympathetic. A few had probably thought she was weak, though they didn't say it to her face. Lydia went through the exit procedures. She handed in her uniform, her security clearance, her access cards. She packed up her flat near Oxford. She said goodbye to the few close friends she had. And then she left. She needed to go somewhere completely different. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere where nobody knew Squadron Leader Lydia Brooks. Somewhere where she could just be ordinary. She had found Windford almost by accident. She had been driving through the countryside, no particular destination in mind, when she saw the sign for the town. Something about it had appealed to her. It was small, only about 3,000 people. It was peaceful, surrounded by green hills and farmland. It was far from any military bases, far from airports, far from her old life. She had stayed one night at a bed and breakfast in Windford. The next morning, she walked around the town. She saw the small shops on Main Street. She saw people greeting each other warmly. She saw children playing in the park. She saw the old church with its bell tower. She saw elderly people sitting on benches, feeding birds. It was exactly what she needed. A place where nothing much happened. A place where life moved slowly. A place where she could disappear. She found her cottage that same week, a small place for rent at a reasonable price. She moved in with the few belongings she had. She didn't bring much from her old life. She wanted to start fresh. The first few months had been difficult. She wasn't used to having so much empty time. She wasn't used to having no responsibilities. She would wake up in the morning with nothing to do, nowhere to be. It felt wrong. She started taking long walks around Windford and the surrounding countryside. She explored every street, every lane, every footpath. She watched the seasons change. She learned the names of the local birds and wildflowers. She read books at the town library. Slowly, very slowly, she started to feel a little peace. But she still needed to work. She couldn't just do nothing. She needed some structure in her life, some purpose, even if it was small. That's when she noticed the sign in the window of Henderson's electrical shop. Assistant wanted. Experience helpful but not required. Apply within. Lydia had smiled when she saw it. Electrical work. She knew electrical systems inside and out. Radar systems, communication systems, all kinds of complex electronic equipment. A small-town electrical shop would be simple by comparison. But more importantly, it would keep her busy. It would let her help people in small, manageable ways, fixing a broken light, repairing a faulty socket. Nothing life or death, nothing with 183 lives at stake. She had gone into the shop and met Robert Henderson. He was a kind man with a warm handshake. They had talked for an hour. She told him she had some electrical knowledge from her previous work. She was vague about what that work had been. He seemed impressed by how much she knew, though he probably wondered why someone so knowledgeable wanted such a simple job. But he didn't ask difficult questions. Maybe he sensed that she had her reasons. Maybe he was just grateful to find someone competent who actually wanted the job. He hired her the next day. And that was how Lydia Brooks began her new life in Windford. The years in Windford passed quietly. Lydia settled into her new identity. Not Squadron Leader Brooks, just Lydia, the helpful woman from the electrical shop. She learned the rhythms of small-town life. She learned who needed extra patience because they were elderly and confused. She learned which buildings had old wiring that needed special care. She learned the gossip and the stories, though she never gossiped herself. People liked her. She was reliable, competent, and kind. She charged fair prices for her work. She never rushed. She explained things clearly to people who didn't understand electrical systems. "You're so patient, Lydia," people would tell her. "Not like those young electricians who rush through everything and charge you a fortune." Lydia would just smile. Patience came naturally when nothing you were doing was urgent, when no lives depended on your speed, when a mistake just meant coming back the next day to fix it, not imagining crashes and casualties. Over the years, she became a fixture in Windford. She joined the local library's book club, though she rarely talked much during discussions. She volunteered at the community center occasionally, helping with their electrical problems for free. She attended the town's Christmas market and summer fair every year. She made friends, though not close ones. There was Martha, the librarian, who shared her love of mystery novels. There was Tom, the owner of the hardware store, who would chat with her about tools and supplies. There was young Sarah Chen from the bakery, who always saved her a cheese scone on Friday mornings. But Lydia never let anyone get too close. She was friendly, but private. People respected that. Everyone had their boundaries, and Lydia's were clear. Nobody asked about her past. Small-town courtesy meant not being too nosy. People assumed she had retired early from some job somewhere and moved to Windford for the peace and quiet. That was close enough to the truth. The nightmares about the near miss eventually became less frequent. Time had a way of softening sharp memories. Lydia still thought about that day sometimes, but it didn't dominate her thoughts anymore. She had found a kind of peace in Windford, even if it wasn't the same as the satisfaction she had once felt in her RAF career. She watched herself grow older. Her hair turned completely gray. Lines deepened around her eyes. Her hands, once so steady on radar controls, developed a slight tremor on cold mornings. But she was healthy and active. She could still climb ladders, carry heavy toolboxes, work for hours without tiring too much. Mr. Henderson grew older too. His back problems got worse. His hands shook more. 5 years ago, he had a minor heart scare and had to rest for several months. Lydia had essentially run the shop alone during that time. When he came back, he worked fewer hours, relying on Lydia more and more. "You should buy the shop from me," he said to her one day, half joking, half serious. "You do most of the work anyway." But Lydia had declined. She didn't want to own a business. She didn't want that responsibility. She just wanted to come to work each day, do her job, and go home. Simple. Safe. The town of Windford changed a little over 20 years, but not much. Some new families moved in. Some old residents passed away. The high street got a new cafe. The school built an extension. But the essential character of the town remained the same: quiet, friendly, peaceful. Lydia's cottage remained her sanctuary. In the evenings, she would sit in her small garden, watching the sunset. She grew tomatoes and herbs. She fed the birds that visited. She read books or listened to the radio. She lived a simple, solitary life, and that was enough. Sometimes she wondered what her old RAF colleagues were doing. Some would be retired by now. Others might still be working, training the new generation of radar operators. She wondered if they ever thought about her, the brilliant officer who had suddenly left. She never tried to contact any of them. That door was closed. That Lydia was gone. Or so she thought. The weather forecast had been worrying people in Windford for 3 days. A major storm was coming from the Atlantic, one of the strongest in years. The meteorologists on television showed maps with swirling clouds and arrows, talking about wind speeds and pressure systems. "Could be quite nasty," Mr. Henderson said on Wednesday morning, looking at his phone. "Says here winds up to 70 miles per hour. Power cuts likely." Lydia nodded. She had seen storms before. Windford usually weathered them reasonably well. There might be some fallen trees, some damaged roof tiles, maybe a power cut for a few hours. Nothing they couldn't handle. "We should make sure we have extra supplies," she suggested. "Fuses, cables, emergency lighting. People will need repairs after the storm." They spent Wednesday afternoon organizing the shop's stock and checking their equipment. Mr. Henderson was moving slowly these days. He had turned 75 last month, and Lydia could see how much he had aged. But he was still sharp mentally, still giving good advice. Thursday morning, the storm hit. Lydia woke to the sound of wind howling around her cottage. Rain hammered against the windows. The sky was dark gray, even though it was 8 in the morning. Trees in her garden bent dangerously low under the force of the wind. She got up and checked her cottage carefully. Everything seemed secure. She had prepared well. Flashlights ready, candles available, her mobile phone fully charged. She made tea and toast, watching the storm through her kitchen window. The power was still on, which was good. But Lydia knew that might not last. Storms like this usually caused problems with the electrical grid. Fallen trees could bring down power lines. Flooding could damage transformers. It was just a matter of time. She called Mr. Henderson. "Are you all right, Robert?" Yes, I'm fine. Staying indoors today, that's for sure. The shop's closed. Nobody will be going out in this weather anyway. You stay home too, Lydia. Stay safe." "I will. Call me if you need anything." Lydia spent the morning reading and listening to the storm. It was violent. She could hear things crashing around outside, probably bins or garden furniture being blown around. The wind screamed and roared. The rain came in sheets, so heavy that she couldn't see across the street. Around midday, the power went out. Lydia wasn't surprised. She got out her flashlight, though there was still enough gray daylight to see by. She checked her phone. The mobile network was still working. She sent a text to a few neighbors, asking if they were okay. The replies came back. "Yes, we're fine. Power's out here too. Hope it comes back soon." The afternoon dragged on. The storm continued its assault on Windford. Lydia tried to read, but she found herself distracted, listening to every crash and thump outside. She couldn't help feeling uneasy. This storm was worse than usual. Around 4 in the afternoon, her phone rang. It was Tom Bradley from the hardware store. "Lydia, are you seeing this?" "Seeing what?" "I can't see anything in this storm." "Look out your front window, toward the high street." Lydia went to her front window and wiped away the condensation. She looked out toward the center of town. At first, she couldn't see much through the rain and wind, but then she saw it. Smoke. Dark smoke rising from somewhere near Main Street, being whipped around by the wind. "What is that?" she asked into the phone. "It's the main transformer station," Tom said, his voice tight with worry. The big electrical pole near the town hall. It's come down, completely down. The transformer's damaged. That's what's smoking. The whole town's without power, and it's not coming back anytime soon. Lydia's stomach clenched. A damaged transformer was serious. It wasn't just about lights and heating. It was about the hospital, the water pumps, the care homes. In a storm like this, without power, people could be in real danger. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad. I called the regional power company. They said they can't send anyone until the storm passes. Too dangerous. And even then, they're dealing with dozens of outages across the region. They can't say when they'll get to Windford. Could be tomorrow night, could be 2 days." 2 days. In the middle of winter, in a storm, without power for 2 days. That could be catastrophic. "What about generators?" Lydia asked. "The hospital has a backup generator for essential equipment, but it's old and not very powerful. It can keep life support and essential medical equipment running, but not heating or all the lights. The schools have some small generators, but most people don't have anything." Lydia thought quickly. "What about Henderson's shop? We have some portable generators." "Already thought of that. I'm calling everyone I can think of. We're organizing a meeting at the town hall in an hour, 5 o'clock. Can you come? We need to figure out what to do." "I'll be there." Lydia hung up and looked at the storm outside. Going out in this weather would be unpleasant and possibly dangerous. But this was an emergency. She put on her heavy waterproof coat, her boots, and her warmest hat. She grabbed a strong flashlight and her mobile phone. Then she stepped out into the storm. But he didn't ask difficult questions. Maybe he sensed that she had her reasons. Maybe he was just grateful to find someone competent who actually wanted the job. He hired her the next day. And that was how Lydia Brooks began her new life in Windford. Walking through the storm was like walking through a war zone. The wind pushed against Lydia so hard she had to lean forward to make progress. Rain hit her face like needles. Tree branches lay across the road. Someone's garden shed had been blown over. A metal sign swung dangerously from a shop front. Lydia kept her head down and walked carefully. The streets were empty. Sensibly, everyone else was staying indoors. She passed Mrs. Morrison's house and saw the old woman looking out anxiously from her window. Lydia waved to show she was okay. It took 20 minutes to walk what was normally a 10-minute journey. By the time she reached the town hall, she was soaked and breathless. But she was there. The town hall was an old stone building that had stood for 200 years. It would take more than a storm to damage it. Inside, about 30 people had gathered in the main meeting room. Someone had brought battery-powered lanterns, casting a dim yellow light. Lydia recognized most of the faces. Tom Bradley was there, and Martha, the librarian. The mayor, George Thompson, was trying to organize everyone. Dr. Amira Patel from the medical center was there, looking worried. Sarah Chen from the bakery, James Wilson, who ran the care home, several other business owners and community leaders. "All right, everyone, please settle down," Mayor Thompson called out. He was a large man in his 60s with a booming voice. "We need to assess our situation and figure out what to do. Lydia, thank goodness you're here. Your electrical expertise might be crucial." Everyone turned to look at Lydia. She felt uncomfortable being the center of attention, but nodded. "First," the mayor continued, "let me summarize what we know. The main electrical substation for Windford has been damaged. A large tree came down in the storm and struck the main pole supporting the transformer. The transformer itself is damaged, not severely, but enough that it's not functioning. This means the entire town is without power." He paused to let that sink in. "The regional power company says they can't help us until after the storm passes, which might not be until tomorrow morning. And then they have to prioritize their repairs across the whole region." They've told me honestly that Windford might be without power for at least 48 hours, possibly longer. Worried murmurs rippled through the room. Dr. Patel spoke up. 48 hours without power means serious problems for the medical center. We have 6 patients currently admitted with various conditions. Our backup generator can power the essential equipment, but it's not designed to run for 2 days straight. It could fail. And we can't evacuate patients in this storm. The roads are too dangerous. James Wilson from the care home added, "We have 32 elderly residents, many with medical needs. No power means no heating. We can wrap them in blankets. But in this cold weather, hypothermia becomes a real risk within 24 hours, especially for the oldest and frailest." "The school has some families sheltering there," another voice called out. "People whose homes were damaged." Tom Bradley said, "The water system runs on electric pumps. If those stop working for too long, we'll have no running water." "That's a health hazard." The voices overlapped, people sharing their concerns, their fears. Lydia listened to it all, her mind working. Mayor Thompson held up his hands for quiet. "I know this is serious. That's why we're here. We need to pool our resources. Who has generators? Who has fuel? What can we do to help the most vulnerable?" People started offering what they had. Tom had 2 small generators at his hardware store. The bakery had a generator for power cuts. A few residents had portable ones at home. But when they added it all up, it wasn't nearly enough to power the hospital, the care home, and help families with small children or medical needs. "What about fixing the main transformer?" someone asked. "Can't we repair it ourselves?" Everyone looked at Lydia. She shifted uncomfortably. "Transformers are complex," she said carefully, "and dangerous. Even with the power cut off at the source, there can be residual charge. Working on one requires specialized knowledge and equipment. Plus, in this storm, it would be extremely dangerous to work on an electrical pole." "But you know about electrical systems, don't you?" Martha asked. "You fixed so many problems around town." Lydia hesitated. What she knew about electrical systems went far beyond fixing lights and sockets. She knew complex electrical grids. She knew radar systems that operated on principles not so different from power distribution. She had managed teams that kept critical electrical systems running under pressure. But she had left that expertise behind. She had buried it for 20 years. "I know about household electrical work," she said. "This is different. This is high-voltage equipment. It's not the same thing." She could see the disappointment in people's faces. They had been hoping she would have an answer. Mr. Henderson spoke up. He had come to the meeting despite his poor health, supported by his daughter. "Lydia's being modest," he said. "I've worked with her for 20 years. She's the best electrician I've ever known. She understands systems in a way that's unusual. She can look at wiring and just know how it all connects, how it all works together. It's like she can see the whole picture." Lydia wanted to stop him, but he continued. "I don't know where you learned what you know, Lydia. You've always been private about your past, and I've always respected that. But I've seen you solve problems that would stump most professional electricians. If anyone in this town could figure out how to fix that transformer, it's you." All eyes were on her again. She felt trapped. "Robert, I appreciate your confidence," she said quietly. "But a damaged transformer in the middle of a storm is dangerous. Even if I could fix it, which I'm not sure I can, the risk would be too high. We need to wait for professionals." "People could die waiting," Dr. Patel said bluntly. "I'm not being dramatic. I have a patient with a serious heart condition. If our generator fails and his monitoring equipment stops working, he could have a heart attack and we might not catch it in time. Every hour without reliable power increases that risk." The room fell silent. The reality of their situation was settling in. Mayor Thompson sighed. Let's not put pressure on anyone to do something dangerous. Let's focus on what we can do. We'll distribute the generators we have to the most critical locations. We'll check on vulnerable residents. We'll do our best until help arrives. The meeting continued, people making plans, organizing teams, doing what they could. But Lydia could feel the underlying fear. What if help didn't arrive in time? What if someone died because Windford was too small, too remote, too low on the priority list? After the meeting ended, people started to leave, heading back into the storm. Lydia stood by the window, watching the rain. Her mind was racing. Tom Bradley came up beside her. "You okay, Lydia?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I keep thinking about that transformer. About whether there's anything that could be done." "You don't have to be a hero," Tom said gently. "Nobody expects that. Henderson's right that you're brilliant at what you do, but this is beyond anyone's pay grade." But that wasn't quite true, was it? This wasn't beyond her old pay grade. Squadron leader Lydia Brooks would have looked at this as just another technical problem to solve. She would have assessed the risks, made a plan, and executed it. But Squadron leader Lydia Brooks had also almost let 183 people die because of 90 seconds of inattention. That Lydia couldn't be trusted with people's lives. Or could she? "I need to go look at it," Lydia heard herself say. "What?" "The transformer. I need to go look at the damage, just to see." Tom looked worried. "Lydia, it's still storming out there, and like you said, it's dangerous. I'll be careful. I just need to see it. Maybe there's nothing I can do, but I need to look." She left before Tom could argue further. The walk to the electrical substation was difficult. The storm hadn't lessened at all. If anything, it seemed worse. But Lydia pushed forward, her powerful flashlight cutting through the rain. The substation was located in a small fenced area behind the town hall. It consisted of several electrical poles, thick cables, and the large transformer that stepped down the high voltage from the regional grid to the lower voltage that Windford used. When Lydia reached the fence, she saw the damage immediately. A massive oak tree had been uprooted by the wind and had fallen across the main supporting pole. The pole had snapped and tilted at a dangerous angle. The transformer, a large cylindrical metal unit mounted on the pole, was hanging askew, held only by its support brackets and the electrical cables. Lydia shone her flashlight on the scene, assessing carefully. The transformer casing was dented, and she could see scorch marks where an internal short circuit had occurred. The insulators were cracked. Several of the connecting cables showed signs of damage. It was bad. But as she studied it, her old training kicked in. Her mind started breaking down the problem into components. The transformer itself might still be functional if the internal damage wasn't too severe. The pole would need to be stabilized. The insulators would need replacing. The connections would need to be remade. It was possible. Difficult, dangerous, but possible. She walked around the perimeter of the substation, examining it from different angles. The rain poured down, but she barely noticed anymore. Her mind was entirely focused on the technical challenge before her. She thought about what it would require. First, she would need to ensure the power was completely isolated, not just turned off, but physically disconnected at the source. Then she would need to stabilize the pole, then assess the transformer's internal damage, then repair or replace damaged components, then test everything before reconnecting. It would take hours. It would be dangerous. High-voltage systems were unforgiving. One mistake could be fatal, and doing it alone, in a storm, would multiply all the risks. But the alternative was waiting. Waiting while vulnerable people suffered. Waiting while Dr. Patel's heart patient's life hung in the balance. Waiting while elderly residents at the care home got colder and colder. Lydia stood there in the rain, facing a decision she thought she had left behind 20 years ago. The decision of whether to take responsibility for other people's lives. For 20 years, she had hidden from that responsibility. She had run away from it. She had convinced herself that she couldn't be trusted with it anymore. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe running away hadn't been the answer. She thought about that day 20 years ago. She thought about those 90 seconds when she hadn't been watching the right screen. She thought about how she had blamed herself, how she had carried that guilt ever since. But for the first time in 20 years, she tried to look at it objectively, the way an outside observer would, the way the investigators had looked at it. The system had failed. Not her. She had been doing her job exactly as she was trained to do it, monitoring multiple screens, managing multiple situations. No one could watch everything simultaneously. That's why there were systems, procedures, backup checks. And when the error had been detected, she had responded perfectly, instantly, correctly. She had saved those 183 lives. Yes, she had almost missed it, but she hadn't missed it. She had caught it, and that had made all the difference. Maybe she had been too hard on herself. Maybe her colleagues had been right. She had been an excellent officer who had responded well to a crisis. Maybe the fact that she could imagine what might have happened showed good awareness of risks, not failure. Maybe Squadron Leader Lydia Brooks hadn't been broken. Maybe she had just been scared. And maybe it was time to stop being scared. Lydia took a deep breath. The rain ran down her face. The wind howled around her. The damaged transformer hung before her like a challenge. She thought about Mr. Henderson's words. If anyone in this town could figure out how to fix that transformer, it's you. She thought about Dr. Patel's patient with the heart condition. She thought about the elderly residents at the care home. She thought about all the people of Windford who had welcomed her, who had never asked about her past, who had let her heal in peace for 20 years. She made her decision. She pulled out her phone and called Tom Bradley. Tom, it's Lydia. I need your help. Within an hour, Lydia had assembled a small team at Henderson's electrical shop. Tom Bradley was there, along with his son Michael, who was a construction worker. Sarah Chen had come, offering to help however she could. And Mr. Henderson had insisted on being there, even though his daughter had protested. I can't do physical work anymore, Henderson had said, but I can advise. Lydia will need all the support she can get. Lydia had spread out a large piece of paper on the shop's counter and sketched a diagram of the damaged substation. Her hand moved quickly, confidently, drawing the poles, the transformer, the cable connections. It was the first time in 20 years that she had drawn technical diagrams, but the skill came back naturally. This is what we're dealing with, she said, pointing at her sketch. The main support pole is damaged, but not completely broken. The transformer is hanging at an angle, but still attached. The cables are mostly intact, but some connections are damaged. She looked up at her small team. I think I can repair it. Not perfectly. It will need proper professional work later, but I can get it functioning well enough to restore power to the town, at least temporarily. How? Tom asked. What would you need to do? Lydia pointed at different parts of her diagram as she explained. First, we need to ensure the power supply is completely isolated. There's an emergency shutoff switch in a box about 50 meters up the line. It's on another pole. We need to physically open that switch to guarantee no power can flow into the substation. I can climb up and do that, Michael said. He was young and fit, used to working at heights. Good. Once that's done, I need to stabilize the damaged pole so it doesn't collapse completely while I'm working. We can use the supports and cables from my truck and some heavy straps from the hardware store. We essentially create a temporary support structure. Tom nodded. I have straps and cables. What else? Then I need to inspect the transformer itself. If the internal damage is too severe, there's nothing I can do. but if it's mainly the external connections and insulators that are damaged, I can repair those. I'll need replacement insulators. Henderson's shop has some that should work. I'll need cable connectors, electrical tape, testing equipment. She walked them through each step of the plan. It was complex, but methodical. She could see the respect growing in their eyes as they realized how thoroughly she understood the system. "This is going to take several hours," she said. "And it's going to be dangerous. The storm is still raging. Even with the power isolated, there are risks. If any of you want to back out, I understand completely." No one moved. "We're with you," Tom said firmly. Mr. Henderson was looking at Lydia with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Lydia," he said quietly, "where did you learn all this? This isn't just electrical shop knowledge. This is something else." Lydia met his eyes. She had kept her secret for 20 years, but these people were about to risk their safety to help her. They deserved some honesty. "I used to work for the Royal Air Force," she said. "I was a radar operations officer. I managed complex electrical and electronic systems, high-voltage power supplies, communication systems, monitoring equipment. I know more about electrical engineering than I've ever let on." There was a moment of stunned silence. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Sarah asked. "Because I left that life behind," Lydia said simply. "I had my reasons. But tonight, those reasons don't matter. Tonight, I need to use everything I know to help this town." Tom gripped her shoulder. "Then let's get to work." They gathered supplies, heavy-duty gloves, insulated tools, cables, straps, replacement components. Lydia made a mental checklist, her old military training surfacing. Prepare thoroughly, anticipate problems, have backup plans. Before they left, she pulled Tom aside. "If something goes wrong," she said, "if I get hurt, don't try to rescue me immediately. High-voltage electricity can be deadly even after the power is supposedly off. Call the emergency services, call the regional power company, get professional help. Promise me." Tom looked uncomfortable, but nodded. "I promise. But nothing's going to go wrong. You know what you're doing." "I hope so," Lydia said. But she was thinking about those 90 seconds 20 years ago, about how close she had come to failing, about how this time there would be no backup, no team, no second chance if she made a mistake. She pushed the thought away. Fear had controlled her for too long. Tonight, she would trust her abilities again. They loaded everything into Tom's truck and headed toward the substation. Working on the damaged electrical substation in the middle of a storm was like working in a nightmare. The wind tried to push them off balance. The rain made every surface slippery. The darkness was broken only by their flashlights and a couple of battery-powered work lamps they had set up. But they worked methodically, following Lydia's instructions. First, Michael climbed the undamaged pole 50 meters away and opened the emergency shutoff switch. It was hard work in the storm, but he was young and strong. When he came down, he was soaked and breathless, but triumphant. "It's done," he called out. "The switch is open. No power can flow through the line now." Lydia double-checked with her voltage tester. No current. Good. Next, they worked on stabilizing the damaged pole. It was tilted at a 20-degree angle, held up mainly by the electrical cables still attached to it. If it fell further, those cables would snap, and the transformer would crash to the ground, making any repair impossible. Lydia directed Tom and Michael in setting up support cables. They attached heavy-duty straps to the pole below the damage point, then secured those straps to 3 other poles around the area, creating a triangular support structure. It was like setting up the rigging for a ship's mast. Tension distributed in multiple directions. It took an hour of hard work, but eventually the pole was stable. Lydia tested it by pulling on different points. It held firm. "Good," she said. "Now comes the hard part. She needed to climb the pole to reach the transformer. In normal circumstances, this would require specialized climbing equipment and safety harnesses. But they had improvised. Michael had brought climbing gear from his construction work: a harness, clips, and ropes. It wasn't designed for electrical work, but it would have to do. Lydia put on the harness, checked every strap and buckle twice, then approached the pole. "Are you sure about this?" Tom asked. "You're 67, Lydia. No offense, but maybe Michael should go up." "Michael doesn't know what to look for or how to repair it," Lydia said. "I do. I'll be fine." But she wasn't entirely sure. She hadn't climbed anything like this in 20 years. Her body was older, less agile. But she had stayed fit and active, and she had no choice. She started climbing. The pole had metal rungs designed for maintenance workers. Lydia climbed slowly, carefully, testing each hand and foot placement. The wind buffeted her. The rain made everything slippery. But she focused on one rung at a time, not looking down, not thinking about how high she was. Below, Tom and Michael held the safety rope attached to her harness, ready to catch her if she fell. It took 10 minutes to reach the transformer, 10 meters up. When she got there, she clipped her safety line to the pole and took a moment to catch her breath. The transformer was larger up close, about the size of a big trash bin, made of heavy metal, covered in warning labels and technical specifications. It hung at an angle, one of its support brackets bent from the impact of the falling tree. Lydia examined it carefully with her flashlight. The external casing was dented but not punctured. The insulators, the ceramic components that prevented electricity from flowing where it shouldn't, were cracked on 2 of the 3 mounting points. The cables connecting to the transformer showed some fraying but were mostly intact. She needed to see inside. There was an inspection panel on the side of the transformer. It was normally sealed and locked, but Lydia had brought tools. She carefully loosened the bolts holding the panel in place. They were stiff from years of weather exposure, but eventually they turned. She removed the panel and shone her light inside. The interior of a transformer is a maze of copper coils, iron cores, and insulating oil. Lydia studied it, looking for signs of severe damage. She could see where the short circuit had occurred, some blackened areas on the coils, some melted insulation. But the core structure looked intact. This was repairable. She called down to Tom. "I need you to pass up the insulated tools and the replacement insulators, one at a time, tied to the rope." They established a system. Tom tied each item to a rope and sent it up. Lydia pulled it up, used it, then sent down the rope for the next item. It was slow, but it worked. She started with replacing the damaged insulators. This required disconnecting the cables, removing the broken ceramic insulators, and installing new ones. Every movement had to be precise. Even though the power was off, she worked as if it were live. Old habits and caution. The wind made everything harder. Several times, she had to stop and hold on tight as a particularly strong gust hit. Once, she dropped a tool and it clattered to the ground below. She heard Tom shout, "You okay?" "I'm fine. Stay clear of the area below me." She worked on. Time lost meaning. There was only the task: disconnect this cable, replace this insulator, reconnect the cable, test the connection, move to the next one step at a time. She reached inside the transformer to repair the damaged coil. This was delicate work. The coil was still hot from the short circuit, even hours later. She carefully removed the damaged section and bridged the connection with heavy-duty wire, wrapping it thoroughly in electrical tape and heat-shrink insulation. It wasn't perfect, but it would conduct electricity safely. Throughout all of this, part of her mind was amazed at how naturally the skills came back. 20 years of fixing lights and sockets hadn't erased the deep technical knowledge from her RAF career. It was like riding a bicycle. the body and brain remembered. But another part of her mind was completely focused, operating in a state of intense concentration she hadn't experienced in 2 decades. It felt right. It felt like coming home to a part of herself she had abandoned. Hours passed. Lydia's arms ached. Her hands were numb from the cold and wet. Her legs trembled from holding the climbing position for so long. But she continued. Finally, all the repairs were complete. She had replaced the damaged insulators, repaired the coils, secured all the connections. She had even straightened the bent support bracket as much as possible using leverage and strength she didn't know she still had. Now came the critical test. She called down to Tom. "I'm going to test the transformer. Everyone stay back from the pole. If something goes wrong, there could be sparks or worse." She used her multimeter to test each connection, each circuit path. Everything showed correct continuity. The insulation resistance was good. The connections were solid. It looked right. But there was only one way to know for sure. "Michael," she called down, "I need you to go back to the shutoff switch and close it. Restore power to the line, but do it slowly, and if you see or hear anything unusual, open the switch again immediately." "Got it!" Michael headed off into the darkness. Lydia waited on the pole, her heart pounding. This was the moment. Either her repairs would work or they wouldn't. Either she had succeeded or she had failed. She thought about those 183 people on that passenger plane 20 years ago. She thought about how she had felt in those seconds when she realized the danger. The fear, the adrenaline, the intense focus. She felt all of that now, but this time, she also felt something else. Confidence. She trusted her work. She trusted her abilities. In the distance, she saw Michael's flashlight at the other pole. He was at the shutoff switch. A moment later, she heard it. A deep hum. The sound of electricity flowing through cables. The transformer vibrated slightly as power reached it. Lydia held her breath, watching the unit carefully. Would it hold? Would her repairs work? The hum stabilized. The transformer was working. She could see the indicator lights on its side glowing, green for normal operation. No sparks, no smoke, no problems. "It's working!" she shouted down. "The transformer is functioning!" From below, she heard cheers. Tom and Sarah were jumping and hugging each other, but Lydia needed to finish the job. She quickly replaced the inspection panel, tightening the bolts. She checked all her work one final time. Then, carefully, she began the long climb down. Her arms and legs were shaking from exhaustion. The climb down seemed even harder than the climb up. But finally, her feet touched the ground. Tom rushed over and hugged her, nearly knocking her over. "You did it! You actually did it!" "We all did it," Lydia said, but she was smiling. For the first time in 20 years, she felt a sense of achievement, of purpose, of having done something that truly mattered. Sarah was crying with relief and joy. Michael was grinning. Even old Mr. Henderson, who had stayed in Tom's truck to stay dry and warm, was clapping his hands. "Now we just need to hope it holds," Lydia said. "The repair is temporary. The power company still needs to do a proper fix, but it should keep the town running for a few days at least." As if in response to her words, the streetlights around them suddenly flickered and came on. All along the street, they could see lights coming on in windows. The power was back. From the hospital, not far away, they heard someone shout in celebration. The power had returned. Dr. Patel's patient would be safe. The care home residents would have heat. Windford was okay. Lydia looked at the transformer hanging on its pole, damaged but functioning. It wasn't pretty, but it was working. Just like her. Damaged by her past, but still capable of doing good. She started laughing. She couldn't help it. The tension, the fear, the exhaustion. It all came out as laughter. Tom and Sarah joined in, and soon they were all laughing together in the rain. By the next morning, everyone in Windford knew what had happened. The story spread faster than Lydia could have imagined. The quiet woman from the electrical shop had climbed a pole in the middle of a storm and fixed the town's power supply. She had saved the day. Lydia woke late, her body aching in every muscle. But she felt good, better than she had felt in years. Her phone had dozens of messages, thank you texts from neighbors, a call from Dr. Patel thanking her personally for saving her patient, a message from James Wilson at the care home saying the residents were warm and comfortable thanks to her. There was also a message from Mayor Thompson asking her to come to an emergency town meeting that evening. Lydia got dressed and went for a walk. The storm had passed, leaving a clear blue sky. The town was busy with cleanup, people clearing fallen branches, repairing damaged fences, sweeping water from shops. Everywhere she went, people stopped her. Lydia, thank you so much. You're a hero. I can't believe what you did. It was overwhelming and embarrassing. Lydia wasn't comfortable with attention, but she accepted the thanks graciously, downplaying her role, insisting that Tom and Michael and Sarah had helped too. But people wanted to know more. They wanted to know how she had known what to do, where she had learned such skills, who she really was. Lydia realized she couldn't hide anymore. Her secret was out, or at least people knew there was a secret. She would have to tell them something. That evening, she went to the town hall. It was packed with people, more than she had ever seen at a town meeting. Everyone wanted to be there. Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order. We're here tonight to thank Lydia Brooks officially for her incredible actions during the storm. Lydia, would you please come forward? Lydia walked to the front of the hall. Hundreds of faces looked at her. She saw Mrs. Morrison dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She saw Tom Bradley grinning proudly. She saw Mr. Henderson sitting in the front row, looking at her with something like wonder. The mayor gave a short speech about courage and community spirit. Then he presented Lydia with a certificate of appreciation and a small plaque. People clapped and cheered. When the noise died down, the mayor said, Lydia, I think everyone here would like to know, how did you learn to do what you did? What's your background? This was it. The moment she had avoided for 20 years. Lydia looked at all the faces waiting for her answer. These were good people, kind people. They had given her a home when she needed one. They deserved the truth. Many of you have wondered about my past, she began. Her voice was quiet, but in the silent hall, everyone could hear. I've always been private about it, but after what happened last night, I think you deserve to know. She took a deep breath. Before I came to Windford, I was an officer in the Royal Air Force. I worked in radar operations at RAF Benson. My job was to manage complex electronic systems that tracked aircraft and ensured flight safety. I did that for 23 years. A murmur ran through the crowd. People exchanged surprised looks. I left the RAF 20 years ago after a difficult experience. I came to Windford looking for peace and simplicity. I wanted to leave that life behind. I wanted to be someone different. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But last night, when I saw that damaged transformer, I realized something. I realized that you can't completely leave behind who you are. The skills I learned, the training I received, it's part of me. And when this town needed those skills, I had a choice. I could keep hiding from my past, or I could use my abilities to help. She looked at Mr. Henderson. Robert has been incredibly kind to me for 20 years. He never pushed me to explain my knowledge or skills. He just accepted me as I was. This whole town has done that. You gave me space to heal, to find peace. And last night, I was finally able to give something back. Mrs. Morrison stood up. Lydia, dear, we're just grateful you were here. We don't care about your past. We care about you, the person you are now. Many people nodded and voiced agreement, but Lydia needed to say more. She needed to explain why she had run away from the RAF in the first place. I left the military because I lost confidence in myself, she continued. I made a mistake, or at least I thought I did. I was responsible for preventing a potential accident, and I almost failed. I caught the problem just in time, but the experience shook me deeply. I couldn't trust myself anymore with that level of responsibility. She felt tears building in her eyes, but continued. For 20 years, I've carried guilt and fear. I convinced myself that I wasn't capable, that I was dangerous. But last night, I had to make a decision. I had to trust myself again. And when I climbed that pole and fixed that transformer, I realized something important. She looked around the hall, meeting people's eyes. I realized that making mistakes is part of being human. What matters is how we respond to them. I responded to my fear by running away. But maybe that wasn't the right response. Maybe the right response was to learn from the experience, to grow, and to continue using my abilities to help others. There was silence in the hall. Then Dr. Patel stood up. Lydia, she said, I have a patient who is alive today because of what you did last night. If our hospital had lost power for another 12 hours, he would likely have died. You didn't just fix a transformer, you saved a life. Maybe you saved several lives. She smiled. Whatever mistakes you think you made in your past, last night you proved that you're still someone who can be trusted with responsibility. Thank you. The hall erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping, some cheering. Lydia felt overwhelmed. She hadn't expected this. She had expected judgment, questions, maybe even suspicion. Instead, she received acceptance and gratitude. When the applause finally died down, Tom Bradley raised his hand. I have a question, Lydia. Now that we know what you're capable of, are you going to keep working at the electrical shop? Because I think the whole country could use someone with your skills. Lydia smiled. I'm 67 years old, Tom. I'm not going back to the military or any high-pressure job. But yes, I'll keep working at Henderson's shop if Robert will still have me. Windford is my home. These are my people. This is where I belong. Mr. Henderson stood up, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. Lydia, you've been a blessing to my shop and to me personally for 20 years. You can work with me for as long as you want. And if you ever want to take over the shop completely, the offer still stands. More applause, more smiles. Lydia felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Acceptance. Not just acceptance of who she pretended to be, but acceptance of who she really was, with all her skills, her past, her fears, and her capabilities. The meeting eventually ended, but people lingered, wanting to talk to Lydia, to thank her personally, to hear more of her story. She spent an hour answering questions, sharing a little about her RAF career, though not too many details, some privacy was still important, and listening to people tell her how much her actions had meant to them. Finally, as the hall emptied, she found herself alone with Mr. Henderson and Tom Bradley. You should have told me, Henderson said, but he was smiling. All these years, I had a former RAF officer working for me, and I was teaching you how to wire a plug socket. Lydia laughed. I needed to learn the simple things, Robert. I'd spent so many years dealing with complex systems that I'd forgotten the basics. You taught me more than you realize. Well, Tom said, I think we all learned something last night. We learned that everyone has depths we don't see. We learned that past mistakes don't define us. And we learned that sometimes the quiet person in the corner is actually an amazing hero. Lydia shook her head. I'm not a hero, Tom. I'm just someone who did what needed to be done." "That's exactly what heroes do," he replied. In the days following the storm, life in Windford slowly returned to normal. The regional power company sent engineers to properly repair the transformer and replace the damaged pole. They were impressed by Lydia's emergency repair work. "This is really good work," the lead engineer told her. "Where did you learn to do this?" "Here and there," Lydia said with a smile. The engineer studied her for a moment. "You know, we're always looking for experienced electrical engineers. If you're ever interested in consulting work, I could put you in touch with our hiring department." Lydia thanked him, but declined. She had found her place in Windford. The local newspaper ran a story about the quiet hero of Windford. A regional news website picked it up. For a few days, Lydia received calls from reporters wanting to interview her, but she politely refused them all. She had never liked publicity, and that hadn't changed. What did change was her relationship with the town. People saw her differently now, not just as the helpful electrician, but as someone with a deeper history, someone with extraordinary capabilities who had chosen to live simply among them. That knowledge created a new kind of respect and warmth. But more importantly, something had changed within Lydia herself. She realized that for 20 years, she had been living half a life. She had been hiding, keeping herself small, afraid to use her full abilities. She had thought that was safety, but it had actually been a prison. That night on the pole, facing the dangerous repair work, she had been forced to trust herself again. And she had discovered that she was still capable, still skilled, still able to make good decisions under pressure. The guilt about that day 20 years ago didn't disappear completely. She suspected it would always be part of her. But it no longer controlled her. She could look at that memory now and see it more clearly. She had been an excellent officer who had responded well to a critical situation. The fact that she had imagined what could have gone wrong showed good judgment, not failure. She began sleeping better. The nightmares that had haunted her for years became less frequent. She felt lighter, as if a weight she had carried for 2 decades had finally been lifted. One Saturday afternoon, about 2 weeks after the storm, Lydia was working in her garden. She was planting spring bulbs, looking forward to seeing them bloom in a few months. Mrs. Morrison came over the fence. "Lydia, dear, I've been meaning to ask you something." "What's that?" "Well, there's a young woman who just moved to town. She's an engineer, just out of university, working remotely for some company in London. She's been asking around if there are any women in technical fields she could talk to. I thought of you immediately." Lydia considered this. "What's her name?" "Emma Richardson. She's lovely, very bright, very enthusiastic. I think she's a bit lonely, being new to town." "Tell her she's welcome to stop by for tea," Lydia said. "I'd be happy to talk with her." A few days later, Emma came by. She was in her mid-20s, with short dark hair and an eager smile. Over tea and biscuits, she told Lydia about her work in renewable energy systems and her interest in electrical engineering. "It's been hard being one of the few women in my field," Emma said, "especially starting out. I second-guess myself a lot." Lydia nodded. "I understand that feeling. I spent many years being one of very few women in technical roles in the military." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? What did you do?" Lydia told her a little about her RAF career, enough to give Emma a sense of the scope and responsibility of the work, but not so much detail that it felt like bragging. "That's incredible," Emma said. "And now you work at an electrical shop in a small town? Don't you miss the complexity, the challenge?" "For a long time, I thought I needed to get away from all that," Lydia admitted. "I had a difficult experience that shook my confidence. But recently, I've realized that challenge and complexity aren't the enemy. Fear is, and I've spent enough years being afraid. She poured more tea for both of them. You asked about being one of few women in your field, Lydia continued. Here's what I learned. Don't let others' doubts become your doubts. Trust your training, trust your abilities, and don't be afraid to speak up when you know you're right. But also, don't be afraid to ask questions when you don't know something. The best engineers are the ones who keep learning. Emma soaked up the advice, asking questions, sharing her own experiences. Before long, 2 hours had passed. As Emma was leaving, she thanked Lydia warmly. This has been so helpful. Would it be okay if I came by again sometime? Maybe once a month? I'd love to have someone to talk to about technical things. I'd like that, Lydia said, and she meant it. After Emma left, Lydia sat in her garden as the sun set. She felt content. She was still living in Windford, still working at Henderson's shop, still living simply. But she wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't running from her past. She was integrating it, accepting it, even sharing it when appropriate. She was whole again. A year after the storm, Windford held its annual summer fair. It was a beautiful day, with clear skies and warm sunshine. The main street was closed to traffic and filled with stalls selling local crafts, baked goods, and produce. Lydia walked through the fair, stopping to chat with neighbors, admiring the displays, enjoying the festive atmosphere. She was wearing a comfortable summer dress and a sun hat, feeling relaxed and happy. At the cake stall, she bought a slice of Mrs. Morrison's famous lemon cake. At the craft stall, she admired Sarah Chen's handmade pottery. She watched children play games and teenagers perform music on a small stage. It was ordinary, peaceful, pleasant, everything she had come to Windford to find. But it was also more than that, because now these people knew her, really knew her. They knew about her past, her skills, her fears, and her capabilities, and they accepted all of it. Mr. Henderson was sitting at a table in the shade, taking it easy as his health required these days. Lydia joined him. Nice fair this year, he commented. It is. How are you feeling? Good days and bad days, he said, but more good than bad lately. How's that young engineer? Emma? Still coming by? Yes, once a month. Sometimes more often. She's become a good friend. That's nice. You should have more friends, Lydia. You've spent too many years alone. Lydia smiled. You're probably right, but I'm working on it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fair. I've been thinking about retiring properly, Henderson said suddenly. Letting you take over the shop completely. I know you said you didn't want to, but maybe you've changed your mind? Lydia considered this. A year ago, she would have immediately said no. The responsibility, the ownership, the commitment, it would have felt like too much. But now? Let me think about it, she said. Maybe it's time, Henderson smiled. Take your time, but I hope you'll say yes. The shop should belong to you. You've earned it. That evening, as the fair wound down and people started heading home, Mayor Thompson took the stage for a final announcement. Before we end today's wonderful fair, I want to recognize someone special. Last year, during the terrible storm, Windford faced a crisis. We could have been without power for days. People could have been seriously hurt or worse, but we were saved by one person's courage, skill, and selflessness. Lydia felt her face flush. She knew what was coming. Lydia Brooks, the mayor continued, would you please come up here? Reluctantly, Lydia made her way to the stage. The crowd applauded warmly. The mayor presented her with a framed photograph, a picture of the old transformer after she had repaired it, with the town's lights glowing in the background. Below the photo was a plaque that read, "To Lydia Brooks, Guardian of Windford, with gratitude from a community you saved." We had this taken the morning after the storm, the mayor explained. It's a reminder of what you did for us. But more importantly, it's a reminder that heroes come in unexpected forms. They're the quiet people who work beside us every day, the people who use their gifts to help others when needed most. Lydia looked at the photograph. It was a good shot, dramatic, showing both the damaged equipment and the restored power. But what struck her most was what it represented. It represented a moment when she had faced her fears and won, when she had trusted herself again, when she had stopped running from her past and instead used it to help others. "Thank you," she said to the crowd. "But I want everyone to remember that I didn't do it alone. Tom Bradley, Michael Bradley, Sarah Chen, and Robert Henderson all helped me. This town saved itself through community and cooperation. I just happened to have the specific skills that were needed that night." She held up the photograph. "I'll treasure this. Not because it makes me look heroic, but because it reminds me of something important. Our pasts don't define us, but they can inform us. Our mistakes don't destroy us, but they can teach us. And our fears don't have to limit us if we're brave enough to face them." More applause. Lydia stepped down from the stage, feeling emotional but good. Later, as she walked home in the twilight, she thought about the journey she had been on. From Squadron Leader Brooks at RAF Benson to quiet electrician's assistant in Windford. And now, what? Still an electrician's assistant, but also herself again. Fully herself. Not hiding, not running, not afraid. She thought about that young woman 20 years ago who had left the RAF convinced she was broken and dangerous. She wished she could go back and tell that woman, "You're not broken. You're human. And humans make mistakes, learn from them, and grow. Don't waste 20 years hiding from who you are." But maybe she couldn't have learned that lesson any other way. Maybe she had needed these 20 years in Windford to heal, to find peace, to rediscover herself gradually. And maybe that was okay. Not everyone's journey is straightforward. Some people need to lose themselves before they can find themselves again. When Lydia reached her cottage, she hung the photograph in her living room, in a place of honor. Then she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow she would go back to work at Henderson's shop. She would fix household electrical problems, help customers, and maybe have lunch with Emma to talk about engineering and life. It was a simple life, but it was her life. And it was enough. No, it was more than enough. It was exactly right. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lydia smiled. For the first time in 20 years, she felt truly at peace. Not because she had forgotten her past, but because she had finally accepted it. She had been a skilled RAF officer who had faced a crisis and responded well. She had been someone who had struggled with guilt and fear. She had been someone who had run away and hidden. And now, she was someone who had found her way back to herself. She was Lydia Brooks, former squadron leader, current electrician, and quiet hero of Windford. All of those things, all at once, all integrated into one complete person. And that was perfectly fine. 5 years after the storm, Lydia Brooks was 72 years old. She still worked at Henderson's electrical shop, which was now officially Henderson and Brooks Electrical Services, after she had finally agreed to become a co-owner. Mr. Henderson had mostly retired, coming in just a few days a week to chat with customers and offer advice. Lydia ran the day-to-day operations, and she had hired a young apprentice named Daniel to help with the physical work. Emma Richardson, the young engineer who had first come to Lydia for advice, had become a regular visitor to Windford. She had left her remote job and started her own renewable energy consulting company, and she often asked Lydia for technical advice. They had become close friends despite their age difference. The damaged transformer had long since been properly replaced, but the photograph of Lydia's emergency repair still hung in the town hall, a permanent reminder of that dramatic night. Life in Windford continued much as it always had. Peaceful, friendly, sometimes a bit dull. But that was exactly what Lydia loved about it. One autumn afternoon, Lydia was working in the shop when a young woman came in. She was in her early 30s, wearing a professional suit, and she looked nervous. "Can I help you?" Lydia asked. "Are you Lydia Brooks?" the woman asked. "I am. I'm Flight Lieutenant Rebecca Collins. I work at RAF Benson, where you used to work." Lydia was surprised. It had been years since anyone from her old life had contacted her. "That's right. What can I do for you?" Rebecca took a breath. "I'm a radar operations officer. I've been doing the job for 5 years, and recently, something happened. Something similar to what happened to you." Lydia understood immediately. "Sit down," she said gently. "Tell me about it." Rebecca sat and told her story. It was eerily similar to Lydia's experience. A system glitch, a near miss between aircraft, a last-second intervention that prevented disaster. Rebecca had done everything right, just as Lydia had. But now she was struggling with the same fears, the same doubts, the same guilt. "My commanding officer told me about you," Rebecca said. "He was a junior officer when you were still there. He said you were the best radar operations officer he'd ever seen, but you left after an incident that wasn't your fault. He thought maybe talking to you might help me." Lydia felt a wave of emotion. Here was someone walking the same difficult path she had walked. But maybe this time, it could end differently. "What you're feeling is normal," Lydia said. "The responsibility we carry in those roles is enormous. When we see how close things can come to disaster, even when we prevent it, it shakes us to our core." "How did you deal with it?" Rebecca asked. Lydia smiled sadly. "Not well, at first. I ran away. I left the job I loved because I couldn't trust myself anymore. I spent 20 years hiding from my abilities, from my skills, from who I really was." She looked at the young officer. "But here's what I learned, and what I wish I had understood back then. You can't hold yourself to a standard of perfection. Systems fail. Unexpected things happen. What matters is how you respond when they do. You responded correctly. You saved lives. That's what you should remember." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "But what if next time I don't catch it? What if next time I'm looking at the wrong screen at the wrong moment?" "That's the fear talking," Lydia said. "And fear is useful. It keeps us vigilant. But it can also paralyze us if we let it. You can't prevent every possible problem. All you can do is your best. And from what you've told me, your best is very good indeed." They talked for 2 hours. Lydia shared her story, the full story, including the years of hiding, the gradual healing, and the moment during the storm when she had finally trusted herself again. "Don't do what I did," she urged Rebecca. "Don't run away from who you are. You're a skilled officer who's good at her job. One difficult experience doesn't change that. Learn from it. Let it make you more careful and thoughtful, but don't let it destroy your confidence." "But how?" Rebecca asked. "How do I move past the fear?" "One day at a time," Lydia said. "One successful shift at a time. Build your confidence back gradually. Talk to someone, a therapist, a trusted colleague, anyone who can help you process the trauma. And remember, you're human. Humans make mistakes sometimes, but they also do amazing things. Focus on the amazing things you've done and will continue to do." When Rebecca finally left, she looked lighter, more hopeful. She thanked Lydia warmly and promised to stay in touch. After she was gone, Lydia sat quietly in the shop. She felt grateful that her commanding officer had remembered her after all these years and had thought to send Rebecca to her. Maybe her story could help others avoid the mistakes she had made. That evening, she called Emma. "I had an interesting visitor today," she said, and told Emma about Rebecca's visit. "That's wonderful that you could help her," Emma said. "Do you ever regret leaving the RAF? I mean, you clearly loved the work." Lydia thought about this. "I regret how I left, in fear and doubt. But I don't regret coming to Windford. I needed this time. I needed to heal. And I needed to rediscover who I was outside of my military identity. If I had stayed in the RAF, but spent years paralyzed by fear and self-doubt, that would have been worse than leaving." "So, what's the moral of your story?" Emma asked. Lydia smiled. "That there isn't just one path through life. Sometimes we need to step back, even step away, to find ourselves again. Sometimes we need to fail, or think we've failed, to learn what really matters. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is be honest with ourselves about our fears and then face them when we're ready." "That's pretty wise for an electrician," Emma teased. "I'm a very experienced electrician," Lydia replied. They both laughed. After the call ended, Lydia stepped outside into her garden. The autumn evening was beautiful, cool and clear, with the first stars appearing. She thought about the path her life had taken, the heights of her RAF career, the depths of her fear and doubt, the quiet years in Windford, the moment of crisis when she had to choose between hiding and helping, and everything that had followed. It hadn't been a straight path. It had been messy, complicated, full of detours and mistakes and small victories. But it had been her path, and she had arrived at a place of peace and purpose. She was no longer Squadron Leader Lydia Brooks or just Lydia the electrician. She was simply Lydia. All of her experiences, all of her skills, all of her mistakes and triumphs integrated into one complete person. And that was exactly who she was meant to be. As she stood in her garden, looking up at the stars, Lydia felt grateful. Grateful for her years in the RAF. Grateful for the people of Windford who had given her space to heal. Grateful for the storm that had forced her to face her fears. Grateful for every experience, good and bad, that had shaped her into who she was today. Life, she realized, was not about avoiding mistakes or always being strong. It was about being human, flawed, capable, scared, brave, all at the same time. It was about using whatever abilities you had to help others when you could. It was about learning, growing, and sometimes starting over. And it was about never giving up on yourself, even when you wanted to, even when it seemed easier to hide. Because inside each person was the potential for courage, for growth, for change. Lydia had found that potential within herself, even though it had taken 20 years and a terrible storm to bring it out. But better late than never. She smiled at the stars and went inside to make her evening tea. Tomorrow would be another day in Windford, quiet, simple, exactly right. And she would face it as her complete self, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. Just Lydia Brooks, electrician, former RAF officer, quiet hero, and fully human being. And that was the best thing she could be. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.